Hey friends, it's Erik. Ever since my dad passed away in March, I've been spending more time visiting with my mom. She lives just a few hours away, and one afternoon while I was there last week, I came across a picture of a dog named Zoe on our local rescue's Instagram. She was the spitting image of Buddy, the little white poodle my parents had had for so many years. He passed away at a ripe old age a few years ago. So I showed Zoe's picture to my mom, and she took one look at the photo and said, "I'd like to go meet her." So the next morning, we drove to the shelter and got there right when they opened. And, well, it was love at first sight for both of them. On the way home, with Zoe curled up in her lap, my mom turned to me and said, "I know I'm never going to get your father back, but today I feel like I got my dog back." And it reminded me how healing doesn't always come all at once. Sometimes it arrives unexpectedly and furry. And even if it doesn't take away all our suffering, maybe it opens something up. Tonight's story carries that same kind of feeling. It's a dreamtime myth about a seed, one that sleeps for 1,000 years in the quiet heart of the earth. There's no rush, no pressure to bloom, just stillness, presence, and a soft unfolding. It's a story about patience, becoming, and the quiet magic of growing in your own time. I hope it gives you space to rest, and maybe trust that something beautiful in you is also already beginning to stir. Let's take a deep breath. In and out. Just letting go of the day, feeling the weight of gravity pulling you deep down into the mattress. Another deep breath in and out. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, no one to be. This is your time, quiet time. One more deep breath in and out. If you get tired while I'm reading to you, that's okay. Just let yourself drift off. The seed who slept for 1,000 years. Long ago, longer than stories remember, longer than wind has whispered, a seed came to rest in the center of the world. No hand placed it there. No creature dug the hole. It simply arrived, as if the earth itself made a hollow just for it. A small pocket in the deep dark, lined with loom and silence. Not carved, not built, just waiting, perhaps for something that didn't yet know it was waiting. There were no names then, no maps, no hours. The world was wide and strange and slow, still settling into shape. Trees rose where oceans once drifted. Rivers curled backward. Stars blinked into being and watched in silence. The wind was still learning to whisper. And beneath it all, the seed lay motionless. Small, plain, a little dull in color. It held no glow, nothing to draw attention. The kind of seed that might become anything, or be forgotten entirely. Quiet, closed, and alone. But whole. Time had no rhythm there. The sun rose without keeping count. The moon came and went like breath. Seasons shifted like dreams half-formed. And the seed, tucked in its cradle of earth, didn't stir. It slept, but not the way we sleep. Not with dreams or drifting thoughts. Its sleep was older, like the rest of stones, like the quiet of a mountain before the snow comes, the kind of stillness that simply is. Above the little seed, the world continued to change. Clouds gathered and broke. Ash from volcanoes settled like petals. Ice pressed across the land, then melted into warm rain, then returned again. Forests rose and fell without witness, and still the seed remained untouched, a presence too deep to name, a resting that didn't ask for anything, untroubled by questions of purpose or becoming. Now and then, the soil shifted. A worm passed close. A root from somewhere far above came near and then curled away. Moisture moved through, then dried. The world was alive around it, but it never touched the seed. It had everything it needed, and still it didn't begin, because its story doesn't start with movement. It begins with rest. Not the rest of exhaustion, not the kind you fall into at the end of a long day. A deeper rest, the kind that comes when nothing is being asked of you at all. The seed didn't know fear. It didn't even know the dark was dark. It only knew the weight of the soil, the soft pull of the earth, the gentleness of being exactly where it was. And so it slept, a sleep so long that even the earth forgot it, a sleep so deep that the stars in their drifting never noticed, a sleep so quiet that one day, far beyond the memory of that place, someone might ask, was there ever really a seed at all? But yes, there was. There is. And it is still sleeping now, somewhere, in the earth, in a story, in each of us, resting, whole, unhurried, waiting not to be found, but to be ready. And that is how all beginnings begin. Time moved, not in lines or numbers, but in the slow erosion of shapes, in the hush between breaths. The kind of time that leaves no mark until everything has changed. Above the seed, the world turned in deep, deliberate circles. Rain came in long silver veils. Mist wandered the hills. Cold drifted in, laying a hush over rivers and roots. Then warmth returned, soft at first, then bold, waking what waited near the surface. But nothing stirred in the deep place where the seed lay. It rested in a layer of the world where change had no urgency, where silence wrapped everything, where even the pull of the seasons felt more like memory than movement. Still, something began to rise within the seed. It didn't understand. It had no language for this, but it began to feel the shifting sensations of the soil around it. The weight of rain above, the slow compression of roots nearby, a soft breath of moisture curling through the ground. These were not messages, but the seed began to listen anyway. There are ways of knowing that come before words. The seed had no stories, no thoughts, but it could sense, and what it sensed was everything. Above it, centuries passed. Skies brightened and dimmed. Forests reached and fell. Creatures wandered across the land, built homes, told stories, disappeared. Their joys and struggles passed like wind, unnoticed by the world beneath them. But even in the deep, their echoes traveled. The seed didn't need to see the world to feel it. The rhythm of life on the surface filtered down, quiet and strange, like music through water. It touched the seed in a way nothing else had. It wasn't emotion. It wasn't longing. Just awareness. And in that awareness, something began to take shape. A pattern. A pulse. A gentle movement, both outward and inward. It had nothing to do with time. The seed had never kept time. It didn't measure its stillness or wonder when to grow. But now, in the dark, there was a soft flicker of presence, a widening in the space inside, a subtle shift, a deeper quiet. It was the kind of watching that trees do, the kind the sky holds when it's full of stars, a simple, spacious noticing. No need to rise, no urge to begin, just the fullness of being. And that fullness knew itself. The world above never paused, but the seed remained, and now it could feel itself. There was peace in that, a peace that didn't depend on what might come, a peace that came from allowing things to be exactly as they were. In the stillness, something softened. A readiness stirred, not to sprout or break open, but simply to be with whatever was happening. There is a kind of awareness that doesn't look for outcomes. It simply listens. And what the seed heard was the beginning of a truth it didn't need to name. Its waiting wasn't a pause. It was a way of being, a kind of presence that doesn't need to explain itself. And so the seed stayed closed. But something within had begun to open, an intuition that one day, maybe, the dark would become something else. For now, the seed was content to rest, to feel, to be. And far above, where the sun warmed the trees and the wind spoke in leaves, no one knew. But deep in the center of the earth, a single seed had begun to pay attention. The seed had grown accustomed to the dark. It no longer felt like something separate. The darkness was part of it. Soft, steady, complete. It wrapped the seed like warm earth wraps a stone, not holding it in, just being with it. And in that deep stillness, the seed had become a part of the land's slow breath. It pulsed with the quiet rhythm of the soil. It had no direction, no story, only a presence, dense and whole. Then one day, or something like a day in a place without hours, something new arrived. There was no sound, no sudden warmth, no break in the silence, just a presence. It settled nearby without disturbing the ground. It offered no touch, no movement, only a gentle weight in the stillness, like moss growing between stones. There was nothing to compare this to, nothing to name. But slowly, the presence became part of the dark, a closeness in the quiet, a second awareness in the one stillness. The seed stayed closed, but it could feel the shift. The earth around it seemed to breathe more deeply. The soil held more softness. Even the silence felt warmer somehow. This presence did not ask anything. It didn't arrive with expectation or demand. It simply remained. All it knew was the way the quiet had changed. It was still resting, still whole, but now it was resting beside something else, something kind. Some beings arrive in our lives without noise or question. They do not fix. They do not urge. They simply keep us company. And that is enough. The companion didn't press against the seed. It didn't coax it to grow. Its gift was its presence, unwavering and simple. And in that closeness, something inside the seed began to stir. No shift in its shell, no movement in the soil, just a widening within, a soft lightness in the space where before there had been only density, just the quiet awareness of being witnessed. There was no conversation between them, but the earth had a new rhythm. Some days, or whatever passed for them, the presence seemed closer. Other days, it drifted back, almost forgotten, then returned as if it had never left. And still, it asked for nothing. That kind of patience leaves an imprint. Inside the seed, something began to stretch, not outward, but inward, as though the boundaries of its small closed world were gently expanding, as though it was making room. No need to understand, no rush to explain. Only the sense that perhaps it was no longer entirely alone. Sometimes healing begins with a silent witness, with someone who stays close, not to change us, but to be beside us while we remain exactly as we are. The seed began to sense that. The warmth of being seen, even without eyes. The comfort of presence, even without words. There's a kind of intimacy that doesn't come from knowing each other's stories. It comes from breathing in the same quiet, from simply being in the same stillness long enough for something to settle between you. That's what lived in the dark now. Something like the shape love makes before it has a name. And that was more than enough. So the seed kept resting, just as it always had. But now the rest was shared. In the deep earth, where stories have no beginning and no end, something had changed. So gently, it left no mark. The seed remained whole. The shell stayed closed. But inside, a little more space had opened. And in that space lived a presence. And in that presence, a soft new feeling took root. Possibility. The companion remained. Seasons passed without name. Soil shifted in its quiet cycles, warmer, then cooler, then warmer again. The presence stayed through it all, steady and soft, a hush inside the hush. And something inside the seed began to drift. There was no signal, no light or sound, just a subtle change in texture, like a breath moving through fog. The stillness deepened, and in that deepening, something new emerged. A flicker of warmth in the seed's center, a curl of sensation that moved without direction, a shape forming without needing to be seen. Dreams had begun. They came slowly, carried on a rhythm that had lived beneath the seed's resting all along. At first, the seed didn't know the difference between what was happening within and what had always been. But the dreams kept arriving. They began as feeling, a memory of movement, though the seed had never moved, a stretch toward light, though the sky remained a mystery. The seed stayed whole, but within its shell, a landscape unfolded. In a meadow full of sound and color, it felt the hush of wind through branches it had never grown. It sank into the warmth of imagined roots slipping through imagined soil. It dreamed of standing. It dreamed of opening. It dreamed of being more than still. The companion was part of the dream now, blended into the pattern, not separate, but everywhere, woven through each image, holding everything together without effort. In one dream, the seed had already become a tree. Tall and bare-limbed, it rose into a starlit canopy, surrounded by quiet others. Wind passed through and left the branches swaying. In another, the shell had opened just enough for light to gather inside. The glow held no heat, no message, just a presence, just the sense that something had always lived in the center, waiting to be seen. The seed didn't wake. It didn't grow. But the dreams began to change it. What had once been a hollow space became filled with image and feeling. The silence turned rich. The stillness pulsed with life unspoken. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't memory. It was something older, something remembered without ever being known. A longing formed, not to become something else, but to continue, to follow the thread, to see what lived beyond the next breath of stillness. The dreams brought no answers, but they softened the seed's edges from within, a slow opening, a gentle release. Sometimes the seed saw leaves, sometimes sky, sometimes only color, sound, and sensation. And through it all, the seed remained at rest, whole, cradled, steady, but no longer unchanged. A question had bloomed inside, without words. What if the dream was real? The answer didn't come as thought. It came as spaciousness, as something stretching just a little wider inside the seed. A readiness that didn't ask for time. There's a kind of unfolding that begins with no plan, that listens before acting, that breathes before becoming. That's what was happening now. The seed, long asleep in the quiet heart of the world, had begun to feel what might come next. It didn't rush. It didn't reach. But it held the dream like a secret, like a song it was learning by heart. Outside, nothing had changed. The earth continued its slow revolutions. Water moved beneath the surface. Far above, the sky turned through its colors. But within the seed, a new stillness had taken shape. No longer the stillness of rest. This was the stillness before becoming. The dreaming continued. One slow breath after another, it opened the space within the seed. There were no lines between rest and becoming now. The silence had deepened into something alive, and the darkness still cradled the seed. And then, without a sound, something shifted. There was no break, no crack, no burst of light. Just a soft loosening in the center of everything. The shell, long wrapped around the seed like armor, softened. Inside, a warmth rose like mist. Gentle, certain, familiar, though it had never been felt before. The seed didn't decide to grow. It simply responded to the years of stillness, to the presence that never left, to the dreams that had opened rooms inside it where none had existed before. A thread of green began to form. It moved inward first, curling into the seed's own heart, feeling its way along edges that had never been touched. It was a remembering, a return to what had always been waiting, a rhythm that had always been there beneath the rest, quiet as roots beneath snow. And the companion remained. It didn't urge or cheer or step forward. It simply witnessed. And in its steady presence, the seed began to unfurl. Not all at once, not with effort, but because it was time. There was no need to rise. The earth made room. A root stretched gently into the soil, as if testing the warmth. A breath of green pressed against the inner curve of the shell. A tiny change, invisible from the outside, but everything had changed. The seed had not been asleep because it was afraid. It had been resting because it needed to, because stillness was the way it prepared for this. And now it was ready. No plans, no shape in mind, just the feeling of yes. Above, the world carried on. Skies brightened, darkened, trees bloomed and shed. Creatures wandered across the surface, unaware that anything below had stirred. But in the center of the earth, a quiet life had begun to move. A new softness where a shell once held firm. A letting in, a letting through. The seed opened not to be seen, not to be known, but because opening was what was happening. The dark stayed close. The soil pressed gently around the change. The green thread inside continued to stretch, guided by something it couldn't name. And the seed, once a story of stillness, was now becoming a story of movement. It would take time. It would take more silence. But the shift had begun. This was what awakening looked like here. Not sudden, not loud, just a soft release into what was always possible. The presence lingered a little longer, long enough to feel the newness take shape, long enough to leave behind a sense of closeness that would remain, even when it was no longer near. Maybe it had always been part of the seed. Maybe it had only come to sit beside it. Either way, the seed would carry its imprint now. A trace of shared stillness. A memory of being seen before becoming. A warmth that never asked for anything in return. This story ends here, with a life beginning to stretch toward itself. A breath curling outward, slow and soft. And maybe this all feels familiar to you, because something in you might be resting too, or stretching, or dreaming its own quiet dream. And maybe, like the seed, you don't need to rush. Maybe your becoming is already happening. Right here, right now, in the dark, in the stillness, deeply seen. And when the time comes, whenever that may be, something in you may open too, just to grow, because growing is what life does when it's ready. So sleep easy. The world is holding you. The light will find you. And all of this, every part of your journey, is unfolding in its own time. You are already on your way and right where you need to be. Good night.